Right, and we'll push on. Can you hear the noise on your end? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Oh, let me try this. Can you hear that one from the video? No. No, okay. There is one button that it works on.
I still can't hear anything.
Yeah, Sam, I can't hear anything.
You said they didn't hear it. Essentially, Poshulakoglu just said, is it about coaching your nation or is it about coaching part of your community? Which I think is quite relevant for where we are. So, agenda of what we're going through this evening. We're going to look at the responsibility of a grassroots coach and what to do at training loosely. There's the next week's webinar is going to be on session design, so we won't do too much about the training stuff now because we'll touch a lot more and in some more detail on that one next week. And then matches, some accreditation and some player welfare stuff. And then lastly, open the floor for some questions. So simply trying to find this in the shortest version I could and try and keep it nice and simple. The coach's responsibility for in a grassroots space or any coach really is developing the player's skills and knowledge of the game whilst ensuring the maximum enjoyment of all participants. And I guess the amount of enjoyment potentially changes depending on the space that you're in. If you're a first grade coach in an A-League, W-League environment, do you care how much fun they have? Because their fun is probably doing the heavy grind and getting the 3 points on the weekend and sort of doing what you're told. But if you've got the Division 7 team where it's very social football and they're not, let's be honest, the most gifted of footballers potentially, but they're there for a different reason. So we've got to make sure that we can tap into that and deliver sessions and an experience that is going to provide them the right level of enjoyment as per what they suits their needs, because we want to make sure that everyone comes back and plays football again year to year. But we also want to make sure that if the players are having enjoyment, probably means that the coach is having a good level of enjoyment as well, and it means we keep coaches in the game as well. All right, so we're lucky with this video that it does have the subtitles as well. So even shows just because he's at the top level of the game, enjoyment is still pretty much a fundamental for a coach at the top level of the game. So It's very important for not only the players, but for coaches. Training. So these are some of the roles or responsibilities that I came up with for a training session in regards to a coach. So essentially, your job, your volunteer payment will be earned through part of this: designing training sessions, setting up training equipment, delivering and conducting that training session, teach any behavioural and football elements, because obviously, particularly with the younger players, we're hoping that they are learning about the game. Reflect on your session, ensure that they will leave and look after that equipment. So we will now sort of break that up, and we're going to look at pre-training. So within pre-training, before you get down to the ground, or before your training session starts, should I say, you've got to design your training session. Now, won't go into too much because you see at the bottom, next week is designing a training session as a thing. So we won't go into that too much, but you might be in a club where you're given your whole season worth of session plans. You might be in a position where you're out on your own and you just turn up with a bag of balls and some bibs and some cones, and all right, and off you go. Here you go. Here's the team. Here's 12 players, and do your best. So even with that, you've still got to have an idea of what you've got to do. And then obviously, regardless of if you've got given your session or you've created session, you've then got to set it up and you've got to then make it happen. Obviously, up to you where that goes from start to finish. Just quickly, as I said, we're not going to touch on it too much, but an insight into what we're going to talk about next week. This is just a timeline of the player's age. So essentially, they could start at any level or any age group along the line, but let's assume that they're starting at under sixes at the beginning of football for most clubland. And they're going to travel, hopefully, from under sixes all the way through into the senior year groups and become a player for many years. And that's the hope. In the discovery phase, so this is the youngest age groups. The emphasis is on natural development and just learning through playing, trying to sort of replicate street football or football that's in the backyard. Or in the recess at lunchtime and stuff at school, where there isn't too much coaching, because let's be honest, 6 and 7 year olds don't listen that well, right? So we don't want to give them too many difficult scenarios and instructions. The skill act phase, which is your 9s to 13 sort of age range, and this is where they can take a little bit more instruction and where the opportunity for them to understand how their body works really well. And we really want to flow them with technical based coaching so that we can upgrade their skills and make them sound footballers for whatever level of football they're going to play in the future. Okay, but not too much tactical, because once they sort of get into the next phase, which is sort of high school age groups, that's when their brain is going to be best suited for that more tactical sort of learning and understanding of their role within a team. And in the 2 younger phases, it's still very much about them as an individual rather than them and the team. And then once you sort of get older than that, it's pretty much just there to go and win a game, right? And with varying degrees of, if you're in the over 35s, you're there to win a game, but you're there to have fun and probably more about the beers afterwards than it is what happens in that 90 minutes beforehand. But I didn't say that. During training. So perhaps the most valuable time you have as a coach is actually during your training session and what you're actually going to do. Once you get to the weekend, in my opinion, most of it's a little bit too late. That they're playing the game. The referee is sort of leading the game. The players are making all their decisions and passing and moving and dribbling and shooting and making all the mistakes and all the good things that they do. But in training sessions is where you have control, that they can do as almost whatever you want them to do within reason, as close to within that. So that's where a big responsibility for a coach comes in, that you're going to conduct that training session be that by an already designed training session, or be that the one that you've created. And then you're going to teach any parts of the game that you as a coach recognize. And how are you going to teach that? And what are you going to teach? And that becomes very important then. And trying to pick and choose. It's not a one size fits all. We can't just say here, because a 9-year-old thinks like this, that you need to teach this, because that's not always the case. You've got some that are quicker learners, some that are slower learners. You've got a mix of ability in your teams that's going to be very difficult to always be able to work with. And you've got to be able to tweak a few things and see how it works and what sort of level of engagement players have, and how quickly they're upskilled in things like that. So yeah, you've got to teach the moments that you want to teach, be that simple, be that short, be that longer, and deliver that. But my biggest tip for delivering any changes of behavior or improvements in football is trying to keep it short and sweet. Don't go in there and coach for 2 minutes at a time, because that's 2 minutes that they're not playing. And if you've set up a game correctly with goals at each end and cones and bibs and ball, the game's going to be teaching to some extent anyway. So allow that to happen, but then go and reinforce the good moments and show, oh, stop there, you could have done this. Good. And off you go, and show me how you're going to go and do that. Don't tell me. After training, opportunity to reflect on the training session. What went well? What went bad? What would you change? If you're going to do it again, would you do it exactly the same way? Would you make an area bigger, be it smaller, round, circle, square, rectangle, whatever's going to happen? You can add more balls, less balls, all sorts of things like that. And that can be from as soon as you've delivered or finished a 15-minute period, actually, I wouldn't do that again, I would change it, to that can be you on next week already thinking about what you did last week. Right, on Tuesday's session last week, we did this, that didn't quite work. All right, well, I'm going to change it now and make this slightly different. And then obviously you've got a duty of care, responsibility to make sure that all the players are picked up and left, and you don't just go, see you guys, and walk out. Probably not a problem with you're over 35, you're all age, maybe you're under 19s, under 23s, not a problem so much with that. But you've got an under 16, you're going to probably be the first person there and the last person there, making sure that little Johnny, little Sarah has been picked up, taken home by the correct person. And then you've obviously got a responsibility from the club's equipment or your own equipment. I know there's many grassroots coaches that are out there and collect and purchase their own equipment for their sessions. So you've got to make sure that you get that all back in at the end of every training session, because I'm no doubt that the jerseys and the balls are probably going to go back to the club at the end of the year, and they're going to want to know why you're missing 20 out of 20 footballs or something like that. So look after that. But obviously you can involve the players and some parents and team manager and what have you to help with definitely ensuring the players are leaving and equipment being collected. Roles and responsibilities for match day. So again, you're probably going to be the first person there and likely to be the last person there. Sorry, before I go, this is all the ones we're going to go through again in breaking it down. So I don't need to read through all of these right now. So I said you're probably going to be the first person there. You need to provide a safe warm-up before a game, making sure that the players are ready for their game and reducing the risk of injuries, making sure that players, their muscles are stretched appropriately, that their heart rate is elevated well enough, and they've got a few touches on the ball, ready to practice what they're hopefully going to go and do in the game and get all the bad ones out the way. Get used to the bobbly field, or it's one and only time you're playing on a synthetic surface that year. Maybe get used to how the ball speed is there. If you don't know what to do for warm-up, in the picture there and at the bottom you see the link to Hills Football YouTube page, where we've got a short how to do warm-up video there with some dynamic stretches that you can definitely take and use in your space. It doesn't have the football content that you might want to have, because that will change depending on the age of the players you're working with and the skill level of the players you're working with and the tactics for that game day. But something to note in terms of warm-ups are reduce or even don't have static stretches. So the standard sit on the floor, reach your toes, or bend over, reach toes, or fold your heel up towards your bum and stretch your quads. All those static-based stretches, research says that doesn't help you pre-game. It's all the stretches that are dynamic and on the move and more game realistic. So the video will show you through all of that. Might be on the day, it might be the day before, the week before. You might have to coordinate any extra players. You've got a couple away sick or absent, school camp. You might be having some players from a younger grade or a lower grade coming up and playing with you on that day. And then finally, one that perhaps might be a surprise to some of you, you are in charge of that team. So if you've got any concerns, you can bring them to light in a reasonable manner. So if you can see your parents are misbehaving on the sideline, being too loud or something like that before the game starts, you can go and have a word for them, or you can sort of manage that to your team manager or something to have some conversations. They might be too close to the field or inside the field perimeters or something. You might have concerns with some players, team sheets being incorrect or correct, and you can take that to the referee before the game. Game shouldn't start unless you feel that the team sheet is correctly completed. There's players that are turning up that aren't on the team sheet. We shouldn't be starting a game. If you've got concerns, speak to the officials before the game starts, definitely. Concerns on the state of the field, or no nets on the goals, or missing part of the lines, or something like that. Don't be happy with it not being up to scratch before the game. That's your time to sort of talk. During a game, so I kind of hit this one, selecting the lineup. That's probably not more of the during the game. It's probably slightly before the game. But obviously, you as coach, you select that, not the team manager, not the players, depending on what your space is like. You might be the over 35s where you are literally just deciding it yourself, or you might be the one that goes and does it. But probably 9 times out of 10, you're the one that selects that team, and you coordinate then any substitutes throughout that game, throughout the entire fixture. Recommendation is that everyone gets fair and reasonable game time. Now, fair and reasonable depends on some of the parameters you put across your team. You might have a training requirement. If they don't turn into training, they get less game time on the weekend, and that's fair and reasonable. If that's what the team was sort of outlined at the start, then I think that's fair and reasonable to continue. We probably don't exclude anyone solely from the game just because they missed some training sessions, but any rules that you have as a coach with your players and with your parents, my only recommendation from an association point of view is you be consistent with that. If you've benched little Johnny because he's missed the last 2 training sessions, or he's turned up late to a game, then make sure you do that the next week when it's potentially your best player that is in that same scenario, so that then there is a level of consistency from the rules that you're policing and applying within your team. Just as when you're on the weekend, you want referees to be consistent with their decisions. If they give a foul for your team or their team for one thing, you want the same to happen the other way around. That way that we kind of understand how we're playing and how we can adjust. We don't want it to be unfair, and the players and parents will be saying exactly the same thing. Just here, I've got a graphic that is something that I use when I coach my teams on the weekend, leading up to the game day. This is sort of the sort of way I create my starting lineup. So I have my formation out there. I'll put my players in what position I think they're going to play on that day, have my subs, and then that way I know, do I need to get a player from the grade below? If someone's injured, right, injured. If they're sick or away, great, I know that, so I know what I'm expecting. And then in the blue table, I have what leads towards my team talks on the day. So what do we need to improve on from last week? So you probably spoke after game last week about what we did badly, what we need to do slightly better. And then you probably address that during the week, would be that in a conversation or be that practically through your training sessions. But just remind them, right, last week, guys, we weren't very good at passing the ball we passed the ball way too slowly, or we took way too many touches, or it could be something very simple to something very complex. So reminded of that, and I want to see an improvement on today, because the game today is like a mini exam for them to show them that they have taken that on board. Then what have you worked on in the week? And you might have worked on essentially 10 things in the week, but they don't need to know all those 10 things. What are the main themes that they worked on that week? And provide them with the opportunity to say, right, this week in training, we worked on our passing speed, good, and we worked on our positions to receive the ball. Great. Those are the two things we worked on. So those are the two things that I want to see us do in the game. You might have a slight plan of when we have the ball, this is how we want to attack. When we don't have the ball and when we're defending, this is something we want to do. And obviously things like that will change dependent on definitely the age group you're working with. You're working with the under 8s. You're probably not giving them much instruction about last week because they've probably already forgotten it. They've probably forgotten what they had for breakfast, let alone what they did in their game last week. So you're probably keeping that very, very simple, that this is the formation you're starting in, and it's probably not going to look like that ever again, because they've all walked, some walked left, some walked right, some gone straight. And it's a case of, right, we just want you guys to score as many goals. All right, so you're going to have to scale that down to the level of player you've got. Then in the orange table, it's just a very simple, it's not a law or an exact rule that you need to keep to, but something I use to help with just coordinates and substitutes. So in the top half of the orange, it's my first half substitute. So players that are on the field versus players off the field, and how many minutes they're going to get across the field. Typically, in the first half, I try and do 2 sets of substitutions if I'm in an age group where there's unlimited subs. I don't try and make 5, 6, 7 subs in a half. I try and keep it to just 2 blocks. So the first one is probably going to be 3, and the next one's probably going to be 2. And then that way I've got all my bench players on, depending on how many subbies you've got. If you've got a goalkeeper on the bench, well, then you've got just do 2 and 2. And they'll be maybe 5 minutes apart or something like that, just so you don't break up the flow of the game too much. And then you might make any subs at halftime, and then into the second half, what your subs look like. And just have it relatively pre-planned. Now, you don't have to stick with that. You've still got to be able to coach the game and put players in places in order for you to go and put the best team forwards at the right stage. Regardless of the age group, we still want to go and win the game of football, right? And we still want to provide the players with the best chance of winning the game. But that is dependent on what you do with the team you've got. Like if I had an under 8s, under 9s team, I'm just doing equal game time, to be honest. But if I've got the under 17s Div 1 team, it's still going to be quite close to equal, but I'm still going to have to manipulate it because they want to win at Div 1 level, most likely. And they're going to be very competitive. So you don't want to be holding them back for that sake. So you're just going to have to be a little bit creative to make sure that you don't get into half time or into the second half and go, I've forgotten about little James here that has only played 5 minutes so far. So now I've got to play him for the rest of the half. And my aim is to always be able to get to half time, everyone having equal game time, 50-50 game time by half time. So then that gives me the second half to be able to tinker it as I need to. And if I do have a player that has trained less because that's a rule, well, then I reduce that in the second half. Or I've got a player that if we're winning 6-0, I take my best players off and give my weaker players more game time to help lift their spirits and morale and give them a bit more confidence, but also try and provide them with the opportunity to show a little bit more of their skills. By also doing that, then when we are potentially in a bit of a tougher game, first versus second, I can maybe play some of my better players a little bit longer. Not drastically, not 20 minutes longer in a 30-minute half, but maybe it's only 5 or 10 minutes and go from there. And then lastly, obviously, deliver any football instructions you've got throughout the game. My strong recommendation, like this gentleman in the picture is doing, watch, observe what's happening. Don't be a commentator. Don't stand there and yell every single pass and every single decision, because they're not going to be listening to you. If you've got children and you try and tell them what to do all the time, they ignore you. And it's no different to when they're on the white line. when they're over that white line, they're kind of doing what's in front of them, and they don't process information very well. If it's coming in one ear and something else is saying something different, and mum and dad on the sideline are saying something else completely different as well, let them play. Let them try and fix it themselves. And if they get it wrong, well, that's a moment to scribble in your notepad. Hey, Chris, that moment where you try to dribble out the back there, next time, what would you do? Yeah, sorry, boss. Sorry, coach, I'll play the pass next time. Great. And that might be the way that you go in terms of delivering that instruction. Post-match, provide a safe cool down. So if you don't know what to do and need some inspiration for a cool down, again, check our YouTube page. After game is the time where that's where you're going to do some more static stretches. That's the time where you're going to take a light jog over in the corner of a field somewhere. You're going to sit them in a group. They're going to be able to do some stretching, reduce the heart rate, have a chat, have a drink, go for a walk, things like that. And that's where you really use your static stretches after the game. Reflect on the game, be that in a group discussion. Hey guys, we're really good today. Brilliant. Off you go. See you Wednesday next week. Brilliant. Guys, look, wasn't the best performance today. We'll discuss it more during the week. Just remember, any discussions you have after the game, if they've won, they're not really listening because they're so happy, particularly if the boy that scored a hat-trick or a girl that scored a hat-trick, not really listening to you. Yep, I just want to go and see mum and dad say they can buy me a sausage sandwich. And if they've lost, they're probably relatively cranky and upset and reflecting in their own head, oh, I should have done this better, that better. So the discussions that you're having on the sideline after the game quite often aren't going in. So keep them relatively short, relatively sweet. Try and get to the point so that the stuff that you do talk about, they've got more chance of remembering. And then obviously you're going to have to reflect on that game afterwards as well in the car on the way home. What worked well? Did they do anything that you wanted them to do? Did training that you did the week before help that game? What have you got to do for training going forwards? What do you need to potentially change when you're playing that team next time? All sorts of things. And obviously ensure that players leave safely and are picked up appropriately. Similar to training, the younger ones, you're probably going to be the last one there. The older ones, if they were driving on their own, then relatively up to them. And coordinate any equipment. Match day is probably one of the biggest days where you lose cones and bibs because bibs are left over on the bench and cones are left over in the warm-up, and your ball got used as a match ball on the day because the home team forgot to bring their ball. So trying to grab that all together again, that can be a little bit of a nightmare. Accreditation. So as a grassroots coach, there's only two requirements that you have. First one is you need to be registered online through Play Football, and that will come through onto iCompman if you're in the Hills Association. You need to be registered as a coach to take that team. And you need to have a working with children's check, assuming that you're coaching a team that has players under the age of 18. Hills Football do recommend that you undertake a coaching certificate as well. So we deliver, also as Hills Football, we deliver a number of them throughout the year. Our busiest time of the year for coaching certificates is February, no, it's probably March and April, right at the start of that season. And then it sort of tails off as we go towards the season. Currently, we do have I think off the top of my head, 2 grassroots, 2 mini route certificates, and 1 game training certificate once we get out of COVID. So if you are interested in yourself in jumping on one of the courses, I'm pretty sure from memory we've got only 3 left to do till the end of the season. But just very quickly on the coaching certificates, recommend it. Mini Roos is recommended for everyone. It's a free certificate, not going to cost you a penny. It's a 1 session, so 1 evening normally, and it's 3 hours. Most of the time, it's aimed towards the coaches that are working in that under 6s to under 9s, under 10s sort of space. So they're the beginners. But there's going to be stuff that you can take on board throughout a number of age groups in that. Your skill training certificate goes over 3 sessions. Normally 3 hours, 3.5 hours each evening, $90, and the game training then goes over 4 sessions. And the content of and what we do within those sessions is slightly different between all of them. But they're not a massive task in terms of hours. The advanced courses, C license and onwards, that's a far bigger spectrum of what we're looking for the coaches to be able to complete. But if you're interested in that, you've all got my email address as well, and I can send you the links of where to find coaching courses once we are allowed back out on the grass. Player welfare. So the next sort of role that that is kind of handed down to coaches without really any thought about it, and you just sort of inherit that as a coach, is as part of your duty of care as a coach, you're going to put yourself in a position where, particularly with younger players, you're going to see a lot, and there's going to be a lot of players that are going to come to you with all sorts of questions, be that football related or non-football related. But there has been times where coaches have been able to notice things in terms of player welfare, be that at home or anything else. So if you happen to notice just any red flags in terms of depression or mental illness or any abuse or just anything that's out of the ordinary, some examples might be that the children, any players are really, really not engaging socially, and that have to be extreme. Doesn't talk to a word the entire session to anyone, stands on their own in real extreme shyness, and this is like week 20. They're still not getting involved. They're still not really wanting to talk to people. Any bruising, marks that shouldn't be there. That obviously with children, they fall over a lot. They get hurt a lot. There's going to be things like that. So it's just anything that is extreme. And then my strongest recommendation with this is report it to the club if you're noticing anything. Okay, it's one of those scenarios where it's better to bring it to the attention of someone and just openly discuss it in case something did happen and you find out how many weeks later that you knew or saw something that you could have brought up and helped out this player further down the track. But don't go and try and fix it yourself. So seek some advice from your club. Every club should have someone in their committee that sort of, be that an NPIO or a convener role that will help you with that. Because the last thing you want to be doing is getting involved in something that you've got no skill set to be able to understand. That quite often you get involved in something, it goes down a rabbit hole very quickly, and it gets quite messy. So wait for advice from a club, from the relevant person first of all, before sort of acting on it. And in reality, I think we're in a bad world if this is happening once or twice a season. So hopefully for all of you, it'll never happen. The closest I can think of in my coaching experience where it's ever happened in this was that we had a player that had a bit of a head knock at training. One training session that at the time I couldn't even remember the head knock happening. It was so innocuous. The boy, at least a week or 2 weeks later, was still feeling dizziness and lightheadedness and wasn't training because just wasn't comfortable on their feet. And at the time, I went and spoke to the parents and said, "Look, this is not normal. It wasn't a big collision. I don't remember it really happening, and I was there at the training session helping out at that time. We recommend it goes and has it looked at just to make sure. Obviously, he can't go back and play and train until he's feeling he can deal with the dizziness and it's not going to fall over." But in the end, they took the advice and went and got checked out and ended up with having a brain tumor. That was the collision that happened at training just aggravated. It had been there for a long time, but aggravated it and set it happening. No one thought anything of it, and fortunately, he's all recovered now, and the boy was probably 16, 17 at the time. So that's the only time I can think of something like this happening. We just had that discussion, and fortunately, it worked out for us in the best scenario. So in my 15, 20 years of coaching, that's sort of the only time I can really think of needing to go down this path. So hopefully, it's not a big thing. So we're almost at the end, to be honest. So again, the coach's responsibility is developing the player's skills and knowledge of the game while ensuring the maximum enjoyment of all participants. It comes back to what we said at the beginning. Now, that's quite a big statement for someone who's potentially a volunteer or didn't really volunteer, but someone volunteered for you to do it. You might not have a coaching license or any real previous history of the game or anything like that. So it's quite a big role. But all we really ask is that you try your best within that. And in the enjoyment, it's quite easy in terms of, do they have a smile on their face? And if they do, you probably got doing things in the right direction. And alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. So as a group of coaches that's on this call now, individually we only affect maybe 10 to 15 players each week, but collectively as a group of 20 odd coaches, that's far greater, right? And there's a lot more out there that some really good work that we're all doing, and we can all lean on people together to help do something slightly different, slightly better, and affect one or two more. The last part I would add in summary is sort of looking at this picture here of the diagram with arrows and crosses and all sorts going all over the place. Hopefully, through this evening, there's a bit of clarity around what your role might be, what you do. Do you do too much, not enough? Do you go all over the place? And how can you hopefully turn that diagram of a field into, rather than having all things going everywhere, one arrow, one direction for all those players to be following and achieving something together. Because without some understanding and some clarity, it's going to be a struggle for yourself and for your team. So extra resources that might be of use to you. So the Hills Football website under the resources tab has some of the policies and competition rules and regulations. Obviously there's things like if you're in the mini roos or the mini tildes space with small-sided games, some of the rules are slightly different, some extra incentives that don't happen in the 11-side version. Facebook for Hills Football keeps you up to date with other news and events that are happening. We also have a coaches hub on Facebook called the Hills Football Coaches Hub, where we add some content over time and have some discussion. We also have a number of resources on the Play Football website. So most of you should be familiar with Play Football from when you did your registrations at the start of the year. But if you go up to playfootball.com.au, there's a coaches tab, and it has a load of resources with session plans, other webinars, documents like the national curriculum and things like that, where you can take bits and pieces and help create your training sessions. And the last one I've got here, which we've already mentioned once or twice, is the YouTube page. So you can get a really good visual of how to do a couple of things. We've got some model sessions, be that for young players up towards older players. We've got games, we've got highlights, we've got live sessions. We've got the how-to series of things like warm-ups and stretches and things like that as well. So next is obviously next week. Great to see from the registrations list that almost all of you have signed up for at least the 2 or 3 sessions in the webinar. So next week we'll be designing a training session for grassroots football. Reason we sort of called it that one was there's a lot of stuff you can get online, and you can go into Google and search for almost anything training related. But how does that relate to a grassroots space? So a lot of the time it's an Ajax or a Barcelona or a Manchester City training video or session plan, and yeah, that's great, but let's not kid ourselves. Our players in Hills Football Association aren't really Ajax or Barcelona players, right? So how can we maybe take that and put our flavor on it, or how are we going to do something very similar but be a little bit more catering towards what our space is, because that's what it is, because grassroots is slightly different. Football's still football. It's still got 11 players or 9 players, whatever the rules are there, 2 goals, 1 ball, 1 referee. So there'll still be a lot of things to continue from there. All right. And that is the end of the session. So what I'm going to do now is stop the